Hello, everybody, and welcome. Lovely to see so many of you here already. Fantastic. Oh, that's so exciting. So just going to let everybody in and just have a little chat while everybody's arriving. First of all, I have Brenda helping me here, so hopefully you can all hear me because she can hear me. Hi. So if you have any questions during this presentation, if you look at the bottom of your screen down here, you have the option for Q&A. So Q&A is where you can enter any questions that you've got while I'm talking, and then Brenda is going to be in charge of asking me the questions so that I don't have to keep looking at them. And you can also use reactions. So if you want to add a reaction now, you could put a thumbs up and we'll see what happens there. Yay, we've got a thumbs. Oh, we're getting thumbs ups. Fantastic. And hearts. Beautiful. That's just amazing. Thank you so much. Okay, so if you don't know me, my name is Sheila Christensen. I've been quilting since I was in my late 40s, and I spotted a lesson, a board outside our local quilt shop that said, come and sew on Saturday. And I thought, well, that sounds good because I don't have the kids on Saturday. So I went along, learned how to do a table runner, and long story short, I ended up buying the shop, becoming a quilt designer, becoming a quilt teacher, an author, and now doing online teaching. So really, really loving this. And this is our first live Zoom. So very excited about that. I've done a little one with some of my online members, but this is the first big one. So welcome to Polish Up Your Piecing. I'm going to be talking about ways to improve your piecing. But before I do that, I think I want to talk to you about why do you make quilts? So I'm going to share some a bit of why do we make quilts. Oh, it says it's failed to start. That's a good start, isn't it? Let's try again. Share. Okay, I will try that later. So why do we make quilts? Well, a lot of people come in the shop and they want to make a quilt for their first grandbaby. So it's really exciting time and they want to make something for the grandbaby. Of course, the grandbaby's not really going to notice if your piecing isn't quite how you hoped it would be. Another reason why we might make them is just for the friendship of belonging to a group. And we might do it for mental health because it's really, really good for our mental health to, it's very sort of mindful activity. We might make quilts for charity, just for friends. And we might make quilts because we're pretty competitive and we want to put them into a show. That tends to be a very, very small number of people. And so getting your piecing perfect doesn't really matter. If your baby's not going to notice, your friends are going to think you're just absolutely amazing. You're still going to get all your enjoyment out of it without perfect piecing. So I really truly believe that people should not feel stressed about their piecing. They should just enjoy what they're doing and make it as good as you can when you do. So why would you want to improve your piecing? Well, it's really just for personal satisfaction and personal growth, and not to feel like everything is going wrong. The better your piecing gets, the easier the whole hobby gets. And so that's our motivation. That's my motivation for getting better. And I don't feel like I need to be perfect. I'm not perfect. None of us are perfect. I'll never win shows for my piecing because I don't want to spend all that time getting everything absolutely spot on. But as I've gone along in my hobby, I've improved. So every quilt I make, I think, I'll do this better next time, or, oh, I'm doing this better now. And some days it goes really well, and some days it goes terribly. So that's fine. But I think if you've got some tips and tricks to make things a bit better, makes you feel better about yourself, and just makes you enjoy your hobby more. So that's the reason why I'm giving you some tips today on how to improve your piecing. So I've divided this presentation up really into 3 parts of piecing. The first one is cutting, the second one is sewing, and the third one is pressing. So those are really the key things that you want to be in charge of if you're going to make things piece and all your points match and all that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to my cutting board, and I'm going to show you. Let's see if we can get over there. And then I'll show you a bit about cutting. So here we are. There's the cutting mat. By the magic of cameras, I'm going to appear over here. Well, my hands are going to appear over here. So yeah, I'm upside down. Shall I stand on the other side? That might be better, mightn't it? Let's stand on the other side. And just check that you can see it properly. There we go. That makes more sense. Okay, so when you're doing your quilting and you want to cut pieces, so say your pattern says start with a 2.5 inch piece. So you're going to get your ruler, and you're going to get your cutting mat, and you're going to get your rotary cutter. So there's a few things, tips for those. One is your rotary cutter really needs to have a good sharp blade. An old one just makes life hard because it drags the fabric. Your mat needs to be nice and flat. If you've got a buckled mat, then that makes it really hard. And you need to sort of get to know your ruler. And rulers are different, they differ. Some of them have got thicker markings than others. And so once you know your ruler, you can then get better measurements out of them. So I know that some people use their mats to measure with. And if your mat's nice and flat, that can work. It depends on how small your pieces are going to be, because the smaller the piecing, the more accurate you need to be with your cutting. And sometimes mats can kind of not be exactly to size. So what I'm going to do is I like to have my fabric folded when I cut, because it just makes it more condensed and easier, unless I'm doing a small piece, of course. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to neaten up my fabric on the right first. Lovely new blade in here. Thank you, Brenda. She put my new blade in this morning. So I've got a lovely neat edge to work from. Then I'm going to flip it over and make sure everything's still lined up. Then I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to put the 2.5 inch line on the edge of the fabric like that. Now, do I put the line on the edge of the fabric? Do I want to see some fabric on that side, or do I want to see it right on the edge there? I don't know. I just put it on. I tend to put it so that this white line is actually on the fabric, and I check all the way up and down, make sure it's like that. And then I'm going to cut. Now, you might have a ruler that's got quite thick lines on, and so you need to get used to whereabouts your fabric goes in relation to that line. And the only way to tell is to try it out. So I've made my cut. And one way I can tell what this actually measures is to put my ruler on. So I could put my 1 inch line on the right, and that would mean that, so this is the white 1 inch line, so my white 3.5 inch line should be on the left. So I think that looks good to me. So now I've got my strip. I'm going to cut another strip from another fabric. We'll do this one, because we're going to do a bit of testing with our sewing. Now this one is all folded, and so I'm going to plug my iron in and give it a press, because that always helps as well. If you have your fabric pressed, it's easier to cut it accurately. Did I see we had a question earlier, Brent? Oh, okay.
Thumbs up.
Oh, okay. Nice. Thank you, Hannah. So, can you see me pressing? Right. So I'm going to press my fabric. And of course, if you've got a big piece, but you only need a strip off it, you don't have to press the whole lot. You can just press the end you're going to cut. So now I am going to cut on the right. Trim it up. So I'm always working from a straight edge. Flip it over. Put my ruler on, find the right line. Oops. And make sure I'm holding it in place so it doesn't slip. So that's another tip, is make sure you're holding your ruler firmly. Yes.
Why do you not use the outside of the ruler, which has, sorry, the other side of the ruler, which has 1/2 inch marking?
Because I could use either. Sometimes I use that side, so you can see the 2.5. So it's kind of set up for left or right-handed people. Normally I'm left-handed, and so being left-handed, I would normally be putting it on like this to straighten it up. Let's just do you a left-handed version. So you can use either. It's absolutely completely up to you which you prefer to use, which ones you think. I thought that you'd be able to see the white ones nice and clearly, but that's okay. And then I can put my 2.5 on the edge here. So either one, you can use either one. So now I've got my strips. I'm just going to give this another press. Now, the reason I've started off with these strips is that we're going to use these to do a test of our sewing as well. So I'm going to press that one. So I'm just going to, this is a really good way to check if your seams are 1/4 inch, because if you notice, you know, in all your patterns, it will say all seams are 1/4 inch unless otherwise stated. So I'm going to trim this here. So I'm just cutting off these strips at about 4 inches so that I can, that's 4.5, there we go. So now I've got some strips I can play with. I'm going to sew 3 strips together. And then doing my quilt maths, this is 2.5, this is 2.5, and this is 2.5. And when I sew these together with a 1/4 inch seam, I'm going to lose 1/2 inch here, and I'm going to lose 1/2 inch here. And so when they're sewn together, it should be 6.5 inches from here to here. So let's just give them another press. I'm going to make sure I'm not twisting, just pressing down.
Any place that you've answered the question about?
Excellent. Yeah, great. And the thing is that if this turns out to be too small, I can think about like being on the outside of the line when I'm cutting. So it's something that you can adjust for yourself, for your ruler and the way you cut, because we're all different. Right, so let's come back a moment. Hello again. So now I am going to just bring myself so I can see better. I'm going to talk to you about the sewing and setting up your sewing machine. And so obviously we all have different sewing machines and different opportunities to set up the sewing machine. So I'm going to go over to mine and I shall show you how I'm set up a bit. Should be that one. Yay! Excellent. It's very exciting. So I know you can't see the controls on my machine because it's an LCD screen. So that makes it a bit hard to do. But I've got, this is my 1/4 inch foot without an edge on it. Some 1/4 inch feet have a little guide on the side. And so that's a way that you can set up your machine, is to use that. But often people say, oh, but I'm using my 1/4 inch foot and it's still not working. So what are the things that you need to pay attention to? Well, first of all, your machine wants to be in good condition and you want to make sure that you keep your needle changed every 8 hours of sewing or so. Also, make sure you're using a good quality thread. So I always use Orifil thread for my piecing. This is the 50 weight Orifil. And use the same thread top and bottom in your machine. And then another little tip is to use what they call a thread saver or a leader and ender. And so what that is just a little scrap of fabric that you can sew onto. So I'm going to just sew onto the edge of my fabric. And what that does is that means that the feed dogs down here have got something to hang on to pull the fabric through. Right, now, when I'm sewing these two together, oops, right sides together, I'm going to put them right sides together, and I need to make sure that these edges are really lined up, because if they're not, my seam won't be 1/4 inch. So you really need to line those edges up and then put it under here, and then use the edge of your 1/4 inch foot as a guide. And if you don't have a 1/4 inch foot, there's a way that you can do it. So here, you see on this needle plate, I don't know if you can see that very well, but there's an 1/8 inch guide and there's a 1/4 inch marking. So you can use that. Or you can do a few trial and errors. So you can measure from your needle 1/4 inch and put a piece of masking tape down on here and use that as a guide. So the main thing to do is to try it, measure, and then feed back from what you've measured into your setup. So we're going to try this one. Do this. And one thing I don't do is I don't measure my actual seam. All I measure is the results of what I've sewn, not the seam itself. And this is where we get into the topic of scant 1/4 inch seams. Because when people say, when quilt designers design a quilt, they work on, in theory, what happens when you join these fabrics together with a 1/4 inch seam. So if you join two 2.5 inch pieces together with a 1/4 inch seam, when you press it, it should be 4.5 inches from there to there, because two 2.5s make 5, and then we've lost 1/2 inch in our seams. But if you make this seam exactly 1/4 inch, you're actually going to lose a little bit in the pressing because of the thickness of your thread and the threads in the fabric. So no matter how well you press, you're going to have this tiny little 1 or 2 threads here that are going to make the measurement not exactly. So we're not working with metal, we're working with fabric. And so that's why they mention or refer to a scant 1/4 inch seam, scant meaning very slightly less than. And so it's only by really trying, trial and error, that you get to the point where you find yourself a comfortable 1/4 inch. Okay, so I've sewn this one on. This is what we always do with our beginners in the first class. Sew one onto one side, and we're going to sew this onto the other side. So it's a really good exercise for you to do. And use my thread saver. Didn't go on to it, did I? Didn't go on to a new one. Okay. Make sure these are really well lined up.
Pinning help with that?
It can help. So when you're a real beginner, a lot of beginners will pin. But if you've got pins that look like crowbars, you see how it sort of bends the fabric a little bit when it pins. So if you do pin, make sure you've got nice fine pins. These are about the thickest ones that I own. I've got some finer ones as well. So that's just a consideration. Don't use great big pins. But yep, certainly do pin if you feel like it. And then I'm going to go through like this. And I can see the edge there, so I'm just going to scooch that up to be right. And then I'm going to sew onto another. So some people use this to actually make quilts. They'll have a load of little pieces all set up in a box next to them with their scraps. And they'll use the leader and ender to join them together. What Pauline does. Our Pauline Cave, who's a wonderful scrap quilter. So we'll just take those off. Okay. And so now we're hoping that this piece here should be 2 inches from there to there, and it should also be 2 inches from there to there. Now let me show you what I do sometimes when I'm tired. And some people do, oh, I need another piece. I've got a piece here. And yeah, we all do sometimes when we're not paying attention. And it can really affect your points because it happens just where your point's going to cross. So if you find yourself doing this, you'll understand why sometimes things don't work. And that is, you're stitching along merrily, fast, fast, fast. And then you go, whee, like that. Did you? And that's what I call a happy seam. Except it's not very happy because it's, I don't know if you can see, let's have a look on here. You can see better on here.
Oh, that's better.
Yeah. So you can see that I started great. Started with my 1/4 inch. And at the end here, I've gone right off. And so because my next piece is going to come here, that's not 1/4 inch away from the edge. So if you're getting very frustrated with your piecing and it's just not matching up, just have a look at your seam and see if you did a happy seam, because that's probably one of the most common things we do, because we think, oh, but everything's set up right. I've tested my 1/4 inch seams. I know my 1/4 inch is right. It's how you hold your fabric as well. So make sure you've got your 1/4 inch all the way through to the end. Right, so now we are going to go over and press this. So I'm just going to switch my camera.
Smiley faces.
Yay! Oh, fantastic. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, so let's go over to the pressing board. I'm going to press upside down so that I can actually see, because I can see my screen if I do it this way around. So now I'm going to give you some pressing tips. The first thing I do when I'm pressing is to set the seam. So what that does is it lets these stitches sink down into the fabric. And when you're pressing, you want to press and hold. If I want something to be really good, I might even press it and hold it for 8 to 10 seconds like that. What you don't want to do is to do this, because that will stretch all the bias in your fabric. So now I've set that seam down, I can then push this open. And I want to make sure that I'm getting right in there. So I've just gone along and then press. This is something I realized because when I first started, all my sewing was so awful. and I used to look at people's quilts that were so beautifully flat and think, how do they do that? And it's being patient when you're pressing. And so now that should be as open as it can be. So let's do this side. 1, 2. Okay, set the seam. Open it up. Just run it along that seam so that I'm not getting a pleat, because if you get any pleats in there, then your seam isn't 1/4 inch, which you'll soon discover when you're sewing things together. Okay, so all pressed. Can run my finger down. Yeah, can't see any pleats in there, so that's good. So now we've got the moment of truth. Ha ha, live, ha ha. The pressure's on. So now I'm going to put one of my lines from the ruler down on this seam, and I'm going to look over at this seam. Yes. So now this should be 2 inches across here. And this is the biggest learning point, isn't it, in our first class with people, is to get this set up, because once you've got that, everything else is going to run smoothly. So you want to make sure it's all the way through from top to bottom. And what do you do if you discover it's not? Well, if, for example, it was like that, and so when I measured, it was less than 2 inches, what that means is that this seam would have been my seams would have been too big. And so I need to make them a bit smaller. And if when I measure across here, it's bigger than 2 inches, it means my seams are very slightly too small. And so I need to make them a little bit larger. But, you know, if it's 1/4 inch out, you divide that over all of your seams, and it's only like about a 1/16 inch in each seam. Because if it's 1/4 inch out, you've got an 1/8 inch there and an 1/8 inch there. So it's only a very small amount. Now, of course, when you're making something that has a lot of squares in a row, or you're going to be adding a border on, and you've got a long strip to join to pieced strips, then that can very, very, very quickly multiply up. And so that's why it's good to measure it at each stage until you're confident that your 1/4 inch is working out okay. So there we go. I've got one more thing to share with you. And we're going to come back to the main video. There we go. So I hope those have been helpful. I did promise also to talk to you about borders. So one tip that I've got for borders, or rather the way that I do borders. So say I've got my quilt up on the wall. I'm going to, before I put a border on, you want to measure from the left to the right horizontally across your quilt with your tape measure. You can actually use your borders to measure with as well. You want your top and bottom borders to be the measurement across the center of your quilt. So say I measure it and it's 60 inches. Then I want to cut my top and bottom borders both to 60 inches, no matter what the quilt measures on the top or the bottom. And then when you join them, you need to pin the ends of your border to the ends of your quilt and kind of divide and conquer, so that you pin the ends, you pin the middle, and then you pin halfway along and then divide it down and keep pinning. And then once you've sewn on your top and bottom borders, or whichever borders you're doing first, if you've got your top and bottom borders on, you then measure your quilt from top to bottom, including those borders, and you cut your side borders to be that size. And then you pin your ends. That's the most important thing. Don't just whack your border on and cut off the bit that you don't use, because if you do that, your borders can go very wavy. And if you take your quilt to a long arm quilter, she's going to be a bit miffed because it makes it hard for her. So that's my tip about borders. So if you are wanting to learn more about quilting, I have a new class starting up, and it's going to be in this format. It's going to be on Zoom. And as well as Zoom, it's actually, the classes are all recorded on video. And then we have a weekly Zoom, which is mostly chatting and question and answer and show and tell. And it's a Zoom meeting, so it's a smaller number of people, and you'll be able to show me what you're working on. And what we're going to make in that class is the quilt behind me, which is the, can I do that? That one, which is my patchwork and quilting techniques class. And you learn so many different techniques in there. You learn piecing, you learn half square triangles, quarter square triangles, Y seams, New York Beauty, Dresden plate applique, foundation paper piecing, and then we actually take it all the way through to the quilting. So you don't just end up with a quilt top. I teach you how to do the quilting, and there is also a bonus lesson, a bonus class, which is free motion quilting. So if you're interested in that, you will be getting an email with a link so that you can sign up. We'll be doing that over the next couple of weeks. It starts in 2 weeks' time. And you'll be able to choose whether to do this time of day or whether to do the other time of day that I've set this free webinar up, which is 7 p.m. in New Zealand, which is good for Australia because that's 5 p.m. And it's good daytime for New Zealand, I think. I don't know if it's any good for America. I think it's a bit middle of the night for America, but this one should be better for you if you're living there. If you need to check a time at any time, there is a website called Meeting Planner. And if you go into Meeting Planner and you put in what cities, you put in Wellington or Auckland for me, and then you put in your city, you can then look up what time it is for you in your time zone. So that is a really useful way to find out about time zones. So have we got some questions? Okay.
Are you able to help people with colour?
Yes, colour choice is one of the first things we do. Oh, Hannah says, does Brenda have her microphone on? Can't hear her. That's kind of deliberate because we didn't want things echoing around the place. So Brenda says, do I help people with their colour choices? Absolutely, we definitely do. And that's one of the first lessons that we do in the course, is to talk about colour and picking your fabrics. And so you can see that with my quilt here, I've used blues, greens, yellows. So I actually have a talk about the colour wheel and also about picking different fabrics based on their patterns and making everything go together. And if you're here in New Zealand, we are going to be doing some actual packs for making the quilt, and because you start off with a number of fat quarters. So we'll be putting the needs list in to the information on the course, so that you can get yourself ready with some fabrics.
Jenny was asking about steam and steam flatter.
Oh, right, yes. So sometimes I do use steam. If you use steam, just be very careful not to wiggle your iron. So if something's being a bit of a pig and stubborn. And the other thing I use, I'm just going to go and fetch it. is this spray. Either this or Best Press. Flatter spray is really good. Best Press is really good. So they're great for taking the creases out and also for putting in the good creases. So, yeah.
Patty's asking something similar about a flatter.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, a clapper.
A clapper. I do. I have a clapper. I don't know where I've put my clapper, actually. Carl made me a beautiful clapper. My husband made me one. And I also bought one from one of my customers, one of my students. Their husband makes them up in Taupo. So a clapper is a piece of wood that you place on top of your seam. And what it does is after you've pressed it, and so what it does is it lets the heat dissipate slowly. And so it really does make your seams beautiful. Yes, so Patty, yeah, definitely do. Right, Jill, what size finished quilt in the class? So this is the quilt, I think it's 60 inches square as it stands. But if you would like to make a larger quilt, we can help you do that. Absolutely no problem. We can change around borders. We can add more blocks. And if you want to, you can make a smaller quilt. So whatever size you like really is the answer to that. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Anybody got any other questions? Okay, don't think so. That is wonderful. Well, thanks so much to all of you. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and look out for some more information, and we'll be in touch soon. So thanks for coming, and goodbye. See you again soon.